Have you ever wondered how exactly time works in the Doctor Who universe? Why Riversong's timeline is so out of sync with the Doctor's? Why the Doctor doesn't fully remember meeting his other incarnations? These are questions that are only briefly touched upon in the show, but they're never outright answered. In this multi-part video series, we're going to try to explain away some of the suspension of disbelief by attempting to analyze some of these concepts logically. But first, we have to ask ourselves, why does the Doctor spend so much time on present-day Earth? Right after this.
Show me what you got.
How's it going, guys and geeks? Welcome back to the Geekritique show. My name's Dakota, and we've got some splaining to do. The Doctor has spent a considerable amount of time on present-day Earth. Well, correction, relative present-day Earth. When the show first aired on November 23rd, 1963, the first Doctor and his granddaughter, Susan, spent a lot of their time in the 60s. Fast forward a bit, and we find that the third Doctor is actually exiled on planet Earth throughout some of the 70s. Fast forward again, and we find that the seventh Doctor's companion, Ace, was actually an angsty teen from the 80s, whom he picked up in the far future. But they return to the 80s quite often. Let's just skip over the 90s and head into 2005. The very first episode of the Doctor Who reboot took place in, yeah, you guessed it, 2005. And finally, let's just jump to the latest series of Doctor Who, which takes place primarily in 2017, when the Doctor is the professor or a professor at some college. All of these examples depict the Doctor spending time in their respective episodes on their respective day of release. The 60s wouldn't be the present day for those of us watching the first Doctor's episodes nowadays, but they were present day episodes relatively in the 60s. Make sense? Kinda. Now, the easy answer as to why the Doctor, upon returning to present-day Earth, consistently lands on our relative to release present day is that, well, it's simply the easiest episodes to produce. No need to spend any extra money on costume sets or studios. You just, walk outside, set the camera up, and start acting, right? Well, yes and no. You might save some money on some things, but money spent on location might be a lot more pricey, including the travel to get there. And while it's convenient to set a story in, say, present-day London, weather, traffic, and season also affect things quite a bit. But at the end of the day, these are the easiest episodes to produce. And I'm not saying that's laziness on the writer's behalf or the production department, because it really isn't. But when a season is being mapped out by the showrunner, they look at episodes at the past, in the present, and in the future, and that's how they see it. And for the writers involved, the present for the Doctor is literally the present for them. But that's the easy explanation. Can we actually find a more substantial reason or answer as to why the Doctor's adventures, his companions, and all of that seem to follow a pattern of him returning to present-day Earth season after season? These are questions that plague me at night. There might be something wrong with me. Now, to some of you, this might be really confusing, so pay attention. And to others of you, this may seem conceptually rudimentary. But still pay attention, because all these little bits and details about how time works within the Doctor Who universe all fit together in a bigger picture. At least that's the way I see it. One of the series' most interesting plays on time and bootstrap paradoxes in general also gives us one of the best descriptions of how time works.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect.
Okay.
But actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
So what that means is it's complicated?
Very complicated.
Let's make it a little less complicated. Now, this is a quick and simplified depiction of that big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff that the 10th Doctor was talking about. This is all of time and space. Imagine this is a 3D object.
You constantly work on 3 other dimensions.
3 of them? Time being the 4th, I suppose. What do you make the 5th dimension?
Space.
Okay. Guess imagine a 5D object, with the 4th and 5th dimensions being time and space. So these are your wibblies, those are your wobblies, this is your timey, and this is all your wimey. The bottom of this circle we'll just call the South Pole, but it represents the beginning of history, the Big Bang, creation of the universe, and all of time itself. Our North Pole represents the opposite, the end of time itself. Notice that in the beginning, time was confined to a much smaller area of space than the majority of the figurative circle. And the same goes for the end of time, because most of the galaxies in the universe had collapsed as stars had burnt and faded away. But all this stuff in the middle? That's a large sandbox to play in. And while the Doctor did say to view it from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, he also admits that time moves in the right order.
Is this how time normally passes? Really slowly. In the right order.
That being forward and not, backwards or standing still. So this timey line we drew from south to north poles, that's the progression of time. And it's always going up or forward. And because the Doctor is capable, via the TARDIS, of traveling anywhere in time and space, time can be seen and experienced non-linearly. To the Doctor and other Time Lords, the past, present, and future are always moving, no matter where he goes, with certain constants, or fixed points in time, as well as variables. But to the rest of the universe, time is linear. And whether the Doctor realizes it or not, he's also a slave to the present, just like the rest of us. You see, whenever we accompany the Doctor back in time and he fixes something, it feels just as important as when he fixes something in the present. But that's because we're following a chronology of his life, and not the chronology of the world or universe around him. But within the Doctor Who universe and time itself, these events have happened a long time ago by the time the Doctor is back in present day. So when the 12th Doctor went back this past season to Scotland in the 2nd century looking for that lost Roman legion of the 9th, those events were well documented by time itself. They were fixed points. And that happened long before the 1st Doctor and Susan ever decided to land in the 60s. Despite the fact that that was 1500 years or more later in the Doctor's lifespan. It's complicated.
Very complicated.
The future, too, is a fixed thing for the most part. Because we know the future exists at all, and we know the end of time has already been mapped out by that big ball of timey-wimey stuff, and the Doctor is capable of making jaunts into it, it can be said from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint that the present is also a fixed point, right? But if it is, why does the present day keep moving forward, and why does the Doctor not know a thing about what's going to be happening each and every day? Why then must the Doctor continually return to relative present-day Earth? The complicated answer? Because it's not a fixed point in time. It's still happening. Relative present-day Earth is the Doctor's relative present day. Try to wrap your head around that. We know that because of all the Doctor's days spent traveling to and from the past and the future, he ages faster than our present day progresses. And yet he's still willingly confined to the present when he returns there. For instance, the 9th Doctor was only 900 years old in 2005. Meanwhile, the 12th Doctor was over 2,000 years old by the time 2017 rolled around. I wish I could live that long. And that was only a mere 12 years later. And he isn't simply returning to this time period because he likes it, because he'd simply continue returning to the 60s, where, the time period that he enjoyed. No. Present day keeps moving, and he keeps moving with it. A little odd, right? And for some reason, the epicenter of all the dangerous things that could potentially destroy the present, and in turn change or eliminate an infinite number of possible futures, is this blue dot of a planet that we sit upon. Within the Doctor Who universe, the past and the future are fixed points. But that ever-moving present is constantly in flux, and it's the Doctor's job to stabilize it. To visualize what the implications of all this means, here are 2 dots that represent the respective timelines of Earth and Mars. As time progresses, these 2 dots rise up the timeline at the same exact speed, just as you'd expect. This may seem rudimentary, but apply that same basic concept to everything in the Doctor Who universe occurring at the present, and then everything moves at the same pace. So those 2 dots, instead of one being Mars, let's now make that Gallifrey, and yes, Gallifrey moves at the same speed. Now that would be the case if Gallifrey hadn't been trapped in time via the Time War, but whatever. Besides that, Gallifrey would move through time just like any other planet would, like Earth. It simply hosts a race of people who learned how to travel through time and space. Sure, the planet is far more advanced and Time Lord society is literally millennia ahead of Earth's, but in present day, both planets would move together in tandem as the present progresses, despite being in separate corners of the universe. The TARDIS knows this, and as such, upon returning to present day, it will always move slightly further down that linear timeline, despite looking at that big ball of timey-wimey stuff non-subjectively. As we previously mentioned, not only is the present a constantly moving point in time, but it is the only point in time that is 100% subject to change at all times. It isn't fixed yet, as far as time's concerned. That makes the present technically far more important, if a little less interesting, than the past and the future. Think of it this way. What point in history is in constant need of saving? Also remember that the TARDIS is known for taking the Doctor to places and times he's most needed. So the present constantly needs saving, and the TARDIS is known to take the Doctor to places that need saving. It adds up. But how do we know that Gallifrey for sure has a relative present day and that it matches up with Earth's? And that the TARDIS knows this? And why don't Time Lords remember meeting other versions of themselves? Subscribe and click the bell to get notified about the next part in our multi-video series, How Doctor Who Time Works. Or, click it right there if it's available by the time you're watching this. Consider checking out our Patreon to support our content, and as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys, have a good one.